Hi, I'm Danielle Bissoni. In today's segment of Time for Change Kitchen, we are going to make avocado brioche. This is not my original recipe. I actually first saw this on a television program called The Vegan Corner, and I have adapted it a little bit to suit my taste, and also I have changed the method a little bit, I think, to make it a little easier. You can judge for yourself. Another thing I've done is added some whole grain to it. It's not 100% whole grain, because I've tried it with 100% whole wheat pastry flour, which is a lighter flour than whole wheat flour, but it still came out as hockey pucks. So I am using the all-purpose flour, but I'm adding a little whole grain to make it a little healthier. It's a very nice, soft bread, which is very appropriate for making burger buns. And so I hope you like it. I think you will. I have never had anyone not love this recipe. The first thing we're going to do is make a sugar water. And this is just going to be lightly brushed on top of the buns, because we don't want to use oil, and this will allow it to become brown. Another thing that I have tried, and it works very well, is using a little aquafaba, which is simply the water that you have when you make chickpeas. When you cook chickpeas, you cook them in water, or you can have a can of chickpeas and pour the water off, and that's aquafaba. It literally means bean water, and it's useful for a lot of things. But you can brush that on top of your buns, and that will also make it golden brown. But I'm going to stay true to this recipe, and I'm going to use a little sugar water. And you use so little of it on this on the bread that it's not significant. So the first thing we're going to do is mix sugar and water, and we're going to put it in the microwave for about 30 to 45 seconds to heat it up so that this will dissolve. Okay, so we've put this in the microwave. This actually took 25 seconds in my microwave to bring it to a boil. And I didn't show that because I believe everybody knows how to use a microwave. And if you don't have a microwave, you can just heat it on the stove. And so we're just going to stir this until it dissolves. And then we're just going to set it aside and let it come to room temperature, because we do not want to put this step off and end up putting hot water on top of our dough. That would be a mistake. Okay. So there we have it. Now we'll go on to making the dough. So we're going to start, and I need to emphasize that when I work with breads, most of the time I measure everything using a scale, because you get a much more accurate and consistent measurement using weight rather than volume. And when you're working with bread, that's critically important. So we are starting with 160 grams of filtered water. If you have a lot of chlorine in your water, it's advisable to use filtered water or spring water, because chlorine can kill your yeast. We're also using 48 grams, which is about 4 tablespoons, of light brown sugar. And so we'll mix this together. Since this is sugar is more than just for activating the yeast, it's also to sweeten the bread. So that's why we're using so much of it. And I'm using 1 package of Fleischmann's active dry yeast. I'm sure there are other yeasts that are just as good. This is 2 1/4 teaspoons, or 1/4 of an ounce. And so we'll add that, and then we will stir that just enough to get the yeast wet. And then we have to let this sit and activate. I used tepid water for this, not cold water. And I have it on my seedling mat. A seedling mat is wonderful for proofing dough. It keeps the dough at about 15 to 20 degrees above ambient temperature. And since all my countertops are granite, they tend to be cold, and so it's difficult to get dough to rise properly. So I like using the seedling mat. Okay, so now while we're letting this activate, and we'll keep an eye on it, and you should be able to see when it starts activating. We are going to start putting our wet ingredients together. We're going to use a cup of plant-based milk. I'm using 100% soy milk for this, and this is 240 grams, and I weighed that as well. I weighed my liquid ingredients as well. And we're using 200 grams of avocado, and so we need to clear this out so that it measures 0 grams, because we don't want to weigh our carafe or our milk. We've already weighed that. So this is a nice a nice ripe avocado. And that is 77 grams. I'm hoping I can get another, get all of the avocado that I need from this 1.5 avocado. I had half of an avocado left over from when I made this earlier. Now you know when an avocado is ripe when you press into it and it leaves a little indentation there. So that's a perfect avocado. $200 grams, perfect. And I'm also going to, oh, you can see here that this is activated. So this yeast is healthy. If this had not activated, if it had not created a foam on the top of it, we would have to throw that out and start over, because your yeast is dead. We need to make sure that the yeast is active before we start making our flour, making our dough. Otherwise, you waste a lot of good ingredients. This is 1.5 teaspoons of salt that I'm adding to this. You could also add it when you add your dry ingredients, but I prefer to add it now so that I know that this is fully incorporated and that we'll have an equal amount of salt throughout the I usually use earplugs when I use my Vitamix, but this was on a low enough speed that it wasn't that loud. I don't think my ears were in damage here, but if I went to high, I would definitely wear earplugs. It missed a little piece, but that's okay. I'll just mash it in there. So we're going to add this to our yeast and sugar mixture now. Giving your Vitamix a little shake like this helps to get a lot of this stuff out. And you don't have to dig around the blade so much with a spatula. A Vitamix is a very good machine. If you are planning to adopt a plant-based health lifestyle, this machine will be invaluable to you. This or any other high-powered blender. This is the one I have experience with, and I think it's a good machine, and it has excellent customer service. Okay. Set that out of the way. I'm going to take my little whisk again. This is a pretty small whisk for this job, but it works fine since I was already using it. And we're going to incorporate these ingredients. Okay, so now we're going to add the dry ingredients to this. The flours, rather. We've already added the sugar and the salt. So we clear this out again because we don't want to measure any of this. and we are going to add 200 grams of pastry flour. So about a quarter of this will be whole grain flour, and 3/4 will be all-purpose. And so I've got this set so that I can see what I'm doing. That's 206 grams. I went a little bit over, and I can scoop some of this off on the top, and it hasn't gotten wet, and it's perfectly fine. So that's 200 grams. And I'm going to go ahead and incorporate this. So I'll have an even amount of whole grain flour in every bun. So now I'm going to zero, excuse me, I'm going to zero this out again, and I'm going to add all-purpose flour. And I want to point out, I like to keep my flours in canning jars because it keeps critters out of it, and it just keeps it fresher. It's good if you refrigerate your flour if you have room for it, or even freeze it, and that will keep it nicer longer. And I always put the name. I always buy organic, so I don't necessarily put it on mine because it goes without saying. And I put the date, the month, not necessarily the day, but I put the month and year that I have it, because time will fly by and you won't realize that you've had something in your pantry for 3 years. So it's good to know. So we were going to add 600 grams of all-purpose flour to this, and it'll take most of this, I think. Here we go, 600 grams. And we'll use this on our board. Okay. So I'm finished with this for now. And so now we'll use this Danish dough whisk. This is the best whisk for making dough that I've ever seen. It will take these heavy doughs and heavy batters, and honestly, I don't know how I ever lived without this piece of equipment. It's not terribly expensive, somewhere between $10 and $15. This is a large one. They also have a smaller one that's about this long, and I have several of both. Okay, we've gotten to the point where it's incorporated all of the flour, or most of it anyway. And it's time to start kneading this. You can either put this on a floured board, a lightly floured board, or you can knead it right within the bowl. I may do both. We'll just see how it goes. Good enough. I'm going to flour my hands a little. This is supposed to be a fairly sticky dough. You don't want it so sticky that it sticks to your hands, but you want it to almost stick to your hands. This looks like it's going to be perfect. And that's the advantage to weighing everything, because it works out perfectly every time. You don't have to add extra flour. You don't have to worry about it being too dry or too wet. If you weigh it, the measurements always work out. Okay, so this is starting to stick to my fingers, and that's just about the way we want it. You don't have to really knead this a great deal. So this is good enough. I'm going to transfer this to a clean bowl, and I'm going to put a little bit more flour on the outside. Not much. And I'm going to transfer it to a clean bowl, and I'm going to let it sit for an hour or maybe an hour and a half until it doubles in size. And I'm going to put it on this seedling mat. It's a good idea when you're making these buns, especially if you have a large family. I always double the recipe. I don't mean within one bowl. I do 2 separate batches, and then I let them rise at the same time. And each batch will make about 10 buns, and 10 buns will fit on a half-size baking pan, a half-sheet baking pan, and I do 2 pans at a time in my oven, so I get 20 buns at one time, and then I take those that I'm not using and I freeze them, because they freeze very well and they heat up very quickly and they toast very nicely as well. So now we're going to transfer this to a clean bowl, and I'm going to see how you push on it. It wants to stick to your hands, but not quite. And we're going to let this double in size. I'm going to cover this with plastic wrap. You can also just put a plate on it if you want to. And then we'll come back when it's doubled in size, and then I'll show you how to make buns. Oh, by the way, I'm also keeping it on my seedling mat so that I know that it will rise within that time frame.